Alright, so we have another 4v4 here. This time it's between the Izmailovski clan and the Brigade Infernale. They're playing the 1809 5th Coalition Corps. Izmailovski is the Imperial, and Brigade Infernale is Coalition. We have Liechtenstein's Reserve, Hope, Rosenberg, and Hiller versus Lannes, Jérôme, Poniatowski, and Eugène, and they're meeting on the map Ireland 1A. This composition's a little interesting for the Imperial. The Coalition is a fairly standard, I would say, army composition for competitive clan versus clan type of gameplay, centered around Hiller and Hope being your two infantry corps, Liechtenstein being your attacking force, and then a third corps to round out either like light cav or support of some sort. Meanwhile, you have like a very fast Lannes army. He's serving here as the sort of avant-garde for the Imperial armies, which for the most part are concentrated over here. Lannes is fully alone on this flank here with an L5, L4 army, and then plenty of skirmishers. These skirmishers are really helpful against the big, chunky, slower Austrians because you can kite them pretty well. And by kite, I mean you stay out of range while your skirmishers deal damage. They're fast enough to walk up and harass, fast enough to walk away and harass, and then you support with these sort of quick L5 infantry. Only one scout cav for Lannes and one heavy cav, which, you know, is pretty basic build for him. Jérôme and Poniatowski are a little bit more oddball choices for 1809. Poniatowski is usually not taken in favor of Bernadotte, mostly because the Saxon army is a little bit better balanced. You get almost a full stack of infantry and quite a bit of cav. In this case, Poniatowski is mostly L4 with these very, very nice Lani. And then Jérôme is mostly L2, and he's in a position to take this road. This map has quite a few different road networks, which makes it interesting for how the armies are going to deploy. A lot of people always wonder in NTW3 how well Napoleonic strategy and tactics and things like that are translated into the game and how well they do. The use of roads and sort of like the idea of utilizing these lines of communication to combine and maneuver armies like they did in real life does apply in the game, since roads do give speed bonuses for those who don't know. In terms of Eugène here, it's a fairly standard Eugène build. It looks like the 1st Division, which is L4, lots of mass, some good horse guns here, and then a single dragoon. This looks like an army where he knows that he's spawning in the back and doesn't need scout cav because his allies will cover it for him. Poniatowski doesn't really have any scout cav since the C7s, the Lancers, have the shortest scout range for at least most cav purposes. Light cav and skirmishers have some of the largest, with generals with high stars like Lannes also providing decent scouting range. So Lannes, as we can see by the movement arrows, is going to take this road here with his L4s and just march straight forward with his L5s and skirmishers. From the sounds on the road here, it sounds like Hiller is moving and shifting towards the center, and same with Rosenberg. If you don't know already, you can actually quote-unquote scout armies based on the noise. Even if the units are hidden, you can still hear the drums. And even sometimes artillery and cav. It's a good way to like kind of guess the positioning of an army. You can also guess the positioning by things like generals being strung out like this. That means that it's being blocked by other units, so the models get dispersed. He's probably marching right now in the middle of his infantry force and marching on this sort of direction here. And it does look like Coalition is going to try and, you know, coalesce probably between these two lock positions. There is good ground here. For the most part, you're on a plateau. You would be looking over into these ruins, which is a 2-point lock, with a nice pebbly, stony area over here that will break up Imperial formations. and you still have, you know, an internal line of movement, which is important for coalition, like I said before. With slower armies, having shorter lines of communication means that you can redeploy your assets a little bit easier than, say, with an L5 army, where an L5 army can quickly redeploy even without road networks from one area to another. An L2 army will take, you know, significantly more work to get from, say, here to the other one pointer if they need to shift reserves. Those are always things to keep in mind whenever you're building, with the speed of your army and how fast you can maneuver. So, just a little bit of scouting right now. Both sides trying to screen their movements with light cav. And it does look like we have Jérôme coming to support Lannes. Now this is kind of a weird one for a support army because, like I said, beginning, he's mostly L2, whereas Lannes is like L4. Trying to catch up with an L4, L5 army with an L2 army to be their support reserve is really, really difficult. No matter how good you are at managing roads and things like that, Lannes will always sort of like outpace you. Horse guns again being used to see off enemy cav. It's a really good way to gain value out of them, is to utilize their speed, get close enough that you can deploy them without getting countercharged, and attack enemy cavalry. You can usually get a few models if you're lucky. If the other players are not paying attention to their cav, you can get it even more, but it's a good way to gain space for your army as you move forward. Some British cavalry here. It's probably not as good with uniforms, but I think, if I remember correctly, Hope gets the KGL Hussars. These probably spotted the Lancers before the Lancers spotted them. Since again, it's light cav versus a Lancer spotting. It's not that much further in reality, but it's enough to be able to react. So see how this popped in just now? That unit, again, probably spotted these Lancers well before it was spotted. And here's Hope's army, sorry, not Hope, Hiller's army, moving across the field. It does look like they're just going to abandon this flank entirely and try to re-centralize here in the center. It's not a bad plan, like I said at the beginning. Again, as coalition, you kind of want to keep yourself centralized, make sure you have the ability to support each other, and not have major gaps in your lines for the French to exploit. That being said, though, they are just kind of running away and letting Lannes do his role as the avant-garde. Historically, Lannes also was the avant-garde of the French army and was quite good at it. Eugène, Jérôme still pulling up. Some more horse guns here. Horse guns are quite difficult to actually deploy properly due to the length of their carriage. You always want to make sure that wherever the guns stop is where you want them to actually deploy. So you usually would probably want to go a few more feet forward, see, to make sure that you don't end up behind the crest of a hill. This looks like Liechtenstein's dragoons. They look quite scary, but they're really a defensive cav force. They don't have the stats to really go toe-to-toe with French dragoons. Lannes completely scouting all of Hiller's army still, whereas Lannes is completely hidden. So that's kind of a ball drop. You want to be able to keep scouting, screening and scouting your own armies. So you want to screen your movements and scout the enemy ones. The Imperial are doing an excellent job of making sure that the coalition doesn't quite have an idea of what's going to happen in terms of where armies are going and where they're being deployed. It seems like coalition will probably, like I said, coalesce here. The cav screen is a little bit too close to their own armies. If I had to guess, you probably hear infantry somewhere around here. Yeah, the infantry is not far behind where this cavalry is. So you need to make sure you keep projecting the cavalry out in order to screen your own army and get a good idea. It's especially important with coalition since you want to make sure that you're deploying where you need to be. Some horse guns going off. So again, they're able to see off cavalry here. Skirmishers.
Yes, sir.
For now, we'll stick with Lannes, because this is where most of the action is right now. It does look like we have sort of like a two-pincer movement. Lannes coming in this direction, Poniatowski coming in this direction, and then Eugène coming more or less to where his guns are, it looks like, and Jérôme following up Lannes' advance. Hiller is here. This looks like Rosenberg. And some of Hope's infantry now appearing here. This type of skirmisher screen is actually quite difficult for the coalition to deal with, especially in 1809, where a lot of the Austrian cavalry is very, very expensive, so trying to snipe these skirmishers with cav tends to not be a cost-effective trade when you're trading like 1,000 gold light cav for a 200 gold skirmisher. He almost got the skirmisher here, but he's protected by the square and his own cav. He might have been able to get away with sniping some of the Lannes scrims by following this cav and using it as sort of like a meat shield, but instead he lost a couple more models. Lannes is definitely in a bit of a isolated position here. He is fully spotted now. Most of his army is seen. They should have a pretty good understanding that this is one corps isolated, but they might be afraid seeing Jérôme's cav on the flank and Eugène's cav arriving as well. But in theory, Hiller could probably deploy where he is right now. This isn't terrible ground for him, and he could have anchored on maybe that one pointer over there. Hiller does extremely well in a grinding along line fight because of how high stat his infantry is for Austria. I don't know if the Austrians actually know that. Okay, they do know. There's at least one of the Poniatowski's line is spotted over here. But right now it does look like we have at least two corps turning to face Lannes' sort of flanking attack here, supported by Jérôme's light cav. Some light cav harassing the retreat. Any sort of like forcing of squares and things like that can keep and put damage on models that you want for later on. Just grind down a couple units while you have the chance to get free damage on them. So Hope is here in the center. Liechtenstein is still over here, it looks like. I'm not sure if there's any coalition troops right now, infantry at least, facing where Poniatowski's infantry is. Because as you can see, there's quite a bit of Rosenberg's reserve is still here in the center. Hiller's reserve is somewhere around where his general is, so right here. This is the sort of shaping, I guess you could say, of the battlefield. Lannes is firmly getting them to commit to holding this line here instead of being outflanked. They want to make sure that Lannes doesn't keep wrapping around them. But in doing so, they've committed quite a bit of their army to the overall army to stopping that maneuver. While it doesn't look like they're scouting here in the center. Jérôme's had this light cav here for quite a bit, and it's providing a decent amount of scout knowledge in this sector. So this is now a point where Lannes does not want to be in, which would be a static, grinding line fight. The skirmishers will do some damage, but the longer and longer his small L5s that utilize mostly maneuver for stand in front of these big Austrian battalions, the worse the trades will be for him. This cav is getting absolutely ripped to pieces by artillery. It does look like a heavy cav coming down the road. Charging using roads with heavy cav is actually a really good strategy to have in mind, because it'll give the typically slow armored heavies a little bit of a speed bonus that you need to close the range with the enemy. You'll lose a few less models. Lannes luckily squares here, so he doesn't necessarily lose quite a bit, but as you can see, these units are getting shredded as they're trying to retreat. But Lannes is faster. He is being pursued by basically an L3 Austrian army. Poniatowski has been spotted on the left, it looks like now. And Coalition is more or less in a very odd shape, almost reminiscent of like a Gettysburg shape almost, where you have the J hook, Lannes pulling away over here, but they have very limited along this edge here. And you have a massive French reserve here and here that still haven't been deployed. This army over here would be far too far away to help if the French commit to an attack on this axis. Lannes doing the smart thing, utilizing his speed to just pull away from the coalition army, having done his job to set the avant-garde sort of stage of the battle. Hiller is fully committed over here. Rosenberg also started to commit his reserves here into the center. They probably were thinking about counterattacking Lannes, but maybe it's a little too late. Rosenberg is now shifting the rest of his reserves here to the center. This is where internal lines is quite helpful. In order for Lannes to support Poniatowski, he has to walk all the way back out of range, all the way over, and then back over here. Rosenberg can shift his reserves from this side of the field to this side of the field in this short little area here, without being under gunfire for the most part. Eugène's army is here and arrived. L4s really give you the flexibility to kind of make these big tactical maneuvers. And again, L4 is again walking away from an L2 army. And all of this has been under artillery fire the entire time. So Hiller is still mostly over here. A small detachment of Lannes moving in to keep pinning action, while the remainder is pulling away. And Jérôme coming up behind. So this is where like Napoleonic principles of, bait the enemy to one location and reconcentrate or concentrate your forces elsewhere really applies in game strategically with these sort of maneuvers. The road networks obviously help, and the deployment on this map was an interesting one that kind of allows for that type of strategic play. Now they're waiting again. The coalition is waiting this side of the field. The reserves coming up. There's not much the French would be able to do against this if they don't want to lose their cav. Pillar being screened by skirmishers over there. And a general advance. They're finally pushing more scout cav here into the center. Liechtenstein shifting cav reserves over. Hussars were thinking about going for these guns up here. Honestly, it's a little bit ambitious to think that you would be able to get them. Coalition guns are at a bit of a disadvantage at this location. Especially considering where the French guns are. Heavy cav coming in against Poniatowski as he was trying to retreat. This is where you want to make sure that your troops that are supposed to be supporting are close enough to follow up the units that you're catching with heavy cav. All of this cav in the reserve has been getting shelled the entire time. So, Lannes has completely disengaged, moved over here, and then now he's pushing into the center with Jérôme in support. That's sort of like what you need to be doing with fast armies is, you know, screening part of your army, make sure that you're able to completely disengage and redeploy and use your speed to move where the enemy is not, and then reconcentrate. So, in theory, you have half of Lannes' corps, and arguably the best parts of it, supported by Jérôme on this side of the flank. And then Eugène pushing forward on this side. And now you have this sort of two-sided attack on an L. All supported by guns over here. And guns over here. So this corner of the coalition line is very, very dangerous right now. Especially given that their attacking reserves and their defensive cav is all the way over here. Pillar is still somewhere over here. And Rosenberg, who really is only mass and decent light cav, is now facing a fast French army attacking at him. While part of Hope, who has generally just okay ability to stand in melee, is also going to be hit by a full 11-point army.
Sir, our general is under attack.
So you basically have two 11-points, an 8-point against half of a 7-point and a 9-pointer. This is where concentration of force, the principle of concentration of force, it applies directly into the game. If you can concentrate your armies, it doesn't really matter what their stats are anymore because you have a concentration of units. Like these French lines can sit here and just take the fire from these guns and just keep walking forward because they have enough manpower in this area that they'll eventually become unstoppable. Same with these guns here. Even though Lannes is attacking uphill, the Austrians are actually behind the hill and not shooting any of these units. And the slower battalions of the Austrians are not able to react now to the fact that they've been outmaneuvered. This army can't redeploy. This flank isn't going to be able to come back to the center to help reinforce it. At best, you can retreat from here but honestly I think it might be too late. There's a way to do it. You'll have to sacrifice some units, but when you see this type of concentration, you should be thinking about how to save your army and your front line with as much of it as you can attack. Heavy cav literally charging uphill into the Austrians. Skirmishers getting routed by friendlies. These Austrian light cav, it looks like. They just can't stand up against heavy cav. Light cav over there, sniping guns. Rosenberg's position now is in absolute peril. Eugène's attack is now beginning as well. Lannes into melee. Skirmishers still screening the flank over there. Hiller making an attempt to tie down this flank, but again, he's being held up by a handful of skirmishers and L5s. So, not ideal for where you want Hiller, especially when Rosenberg is about to get walked over, basically. Squares being formed. Rosenberg's reserve. Okay, so with Austria, you need like a very defined defensive line. Any sort of chaos in your back lines will only be amplified as units start routing, as cavalry tries to make plays. So this already has like a chaotic feel to it. It'll be really hard for them to organize a defense now that the French are starting to gain momentum. You can see they're already trying to pull back. French don't even need to care about the guns. They literally could walk forward because they have so many infantry here. Rosenberg is trying to form, but I mean it's L2s. They aren't going to form fast enough for what's happening around them. And these routing troops are now routing through your lines. They aren't going to help you hold. Poniatowski on the counterattack as well. There's still... Rosenberg is going to be split if this is Rosenberg's infantry. It does look like it. So this is just pure numbers at this point. You can't be everywhere microing both fronts of your army. Like Rosenberg is literally trying to fight for his life and on multiple angles. Whereas these axis of attack and concentration of power is too much to handle. Poniatowski gonna take advantage of that as well. Cav reserves trying to make something happen, but most of it is hitting squares. You're getting debuffed by your friendlies, so there's, you know, morale is already breaking. There's just too many units. You're trying to run through routing friendlies, and that'll break up your charge. Lannes has initiated the melee over here, and now Jérôme is following it up with his L3s. See, literally none of these French lines routed to that heavy cav. It inflicted losses, but now it's gone for good. Poniatowski managed to wipe out this corner over here. Coalition is in full retreat, but they're honestly too close to retreat at this point, especially with L2 armies, and they're losing more and more cav. You won't be able to escape, properly at least. Lannes still kiting and tying up Hiller over here. But the Austrian center is ruptured. I mean, they had them at a perfect V here, and they smacked to the corner of the V. Some counterattacks coming in. Again, if you're trying to make sense of this right here, like, where is your army? Where do you draw lines? How do you draw lines in the battlefield? Once the Austrians start routing, it's really tough to regain composure, and this one unit could possibly rout all of this if they, based on how it's becoming more and more disorganized. If you let the Austrians shoot, they do this, you know, absolutely wipe out the French and Allied alliance. But you need to keep the enemy at length in order to keep them in the shooting grind. So Hope is repositioned into the town with some of his reserves, making a counterattack, it looks like, this direction. Hiller is trying to make something happen over here.
Our men are running, sir.
But at this point, you know, unless Hiller can wipe out 2 corps by himself, which is not out of the question, you know, these Austrians have to start coming back. They need to stabilize something of a line somewhere. Get a good counterattack with Hiller's infantry. Scavenge what you can. Buy yourself breathing room as the coalition, and see what you can do. Retreating like this in front of the enemy, you want to always make sure that at least some of your units are formed while you're in a retreat. Otherwise, you know, when you're within striking distance, you're not going to be able, you can actually end up losing all of your army when you try to retreat like that. And again, the Brits getting to shoot. But again, it's a little too late for that type of damage to become effective. Poniatowski charging in to melee. Units are already redlining just from being in melee and the friendly debuffs around them. Another sort of desperate charge here to counterattack, hoping to get some damage done with Hiller. But the problem is now Hiller is in a V himself. Scrims and light, or the faster infantry here. Artillery hitting him fully along the line. And more guns coming up. So this was a good example over here of combined infantry and cav play. You can use the cav, light cav, to kind of force squares and then get close with your infantry to charge it into melee. That way you don't take as much damage from a fully formed British battalion blasting you at point blank. Again, another, looks like Austrian squares here. Point blank 6 pounders. Not even Hiller can survive that. Another charge by heavy cav. This is where it means he'll come up and fin there. So he's firing in melee. Some people say like, oh, you would shoot your gun in melee even if, you know, in real life. There wasn't a fire order there, so it wasn't intentional. But, you know, it's a game-breaking mechanic, so that's why it's not allowed. It gives a major debuff to cavalry, despite being fully in melee. Some of the Austrian armies are coming back. This huge blob over here, some of it could have come back. Trying to get the guns. I mean, Pillar infantry is quite strong. They were able to break that hardy, survived a cav charge, and pushed the guns off the gun crew off. See. So some of these units are coming back. The important part for here would be to get a general close by to rally and make sure that they stay back instead of routing again, because they'll constantly get the debuff of being exhausted and friends routing nearby. It's also important wide to farm units, and by farm I mean utilize your light cav advantage to run down routing units. Make sure they don't come back.
Our men are running, sir.
So yeah, I mean in general, like this battle was decided based on maneuver rather than individual gameplay or strategy or anything like that. Like some games are decided based on a player's ability to play the video game. This one was more decided on the fact that the Izmailovski clan as a whole was able to screen over here with
now they must break.
good generalship, get the coalition to overcommit on this flank, disengage, and then recombine their armies utilizing Imperial speed to smack into the corner of this sort of U-shape that they had forced the coalition into. So they utilized their speed, their guns, their cav, etc. to shape the battlefield into a favorable position for them, and then concentration of force, and then utilizes that concentration of force to break what they wanted. Despite the coalition having interior lines and ability to shift reserves, their reserves were not in the place that you needed them to be, and it looks like they probably misread the situation here where the main attack ended up happening, because they kept weighting their flanks down with more and more reserves, and the reserve cavalry and things along those lines that would have been helpful for you know, holding this central part. They should have probably pulled back earlier, straightened the lines so they didn't get attacked and pinched from both flanks at the same exact time. You just, no matter how good of a player you are, that pure numbers game of being attacked from both sides will eventually lead you to just losing no matter what. You can micro for your life and be clicking every single unit that you have and, you know, zipping back and forth around the map, but ultimately they lost based on strategic play rather than tactical play.
The men are fatigued, sir, and must rest a while.
You know, the order mixed sort of thing of that the French were known for, utilizing skirmishers mixed with infantry to close in with the enemy. You saw that at the beginning with Lannes. The coalition really didn't have an answer to it. It's quite hard to break, like I said at the very beginning. The Austrian cav is a little bit too expensive to waste on skirmishers. Unfortunately, I don't have the end screen Both the Izmailovski and Brigade Infernale did not have it available, so unfortunately that's not here. You can see this one was, it looks like Eugène's army. But yeah, that's the general idea of, you know, positional warfare, strategic deployments and maneuvers, and forcing your enemy into a fight that you want versus what they want. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll keep trying to cast these the best I can. Thank you again for watching.